Hello and welcome to the final day of the HUBZone Small Business Summit. It has been a long month, but we're really glad that you are all going to be here with us today because throughout the last 30 days, we have covered a number of key topics that are impacting the small business community, and everything comes to fruition at today's session. Today, we have our advocacy team, Eliza Joyner, Elizabeth Sullivan, and Ann Sullivan, all of which I'm sure nobody really needs an introduction to them. They've been with us for years, and they have been key in really shaping policy and legislation that's improved the HUBZone program. Today, they're going to talk about what's happening on the Hill, what's coming, what to expect. And towards the end, we're going to encourage everybody to get involved because we're going to start shaping our FY 2022 priorities. And as members of the HUBZone community, it's your job and duty. We know that there's a lot of issues, but we're not trying to complain about what's wrong with something. We're trying to come up with solutions on how to fix it. So this is going to be recorded, and we encourage everybody to leverage the Q&A function in the chat box. Throughout the session, we will be monitoring the Q&A and answering questions, but at the end, we ask if you want to just be able to speak, if you have anything, information to share or priorities that you want to address, raise your hand and we will pull you in so you can actually speak instead of having to write a book report in the chat box, because we realize that might be difficult to articulate your point. Policy is not exactly the most, that's the reason why we have this call. It's quite confusing and cumbersome, so sometimes it's just easy to be able to speak. So without further ado, I would like to bring our wonderful advocacy team to take over. I'm going to go on mute and let's get started, everybody.
Well, thanks so much, Michelle. Really appreciate the introduction. Again, I am Lizzie Sullivan, President of Madison Services Group. We have Eliza Joyner, who's on our team, joining us today, that many of you met at the HUBZone Council Summit in person. And of course, Ann Sullivan, founder and our strategic advisor at MSGI. So let's kind of get into it. What's going on in Washington? Ann, I'm going to let you tackle all of the craziness going on the Hill this week.
Well, things got a little bit better, or are about to get better today, because one of the big issues was how to fund the government. Would the continuing resolution pass? It's effective until December 3. That was a big question. The rhetoric was partisan. This is as close as I have come to worrying about a shutdown. I mean, every year it's kind of threatened, but I really felt like this was a worry. The House passed it last night. The Senate's going to pass it today. There are a few amendments. 3 of them, I mean, they're pretty much partisan amendments. They're going to go down. And then it'll go to the White House, and Joe Biden will be up late waiting for the bill to it physically shows up at the White House to sign it and keep the government funded at least for a couple of months. Then the next big issue, well, the next big issue is debt ceiling. Raising the debt ceiling is a mundane, routine, every year occurrence, but it is in the law that the Congress has to approve it in order for the Treasury to raise the debt ceiling when necessary. It has become just the most partisan opportunity to grandstand on, deficit, the debt. It doesn't matter which party's in power. The Republicans, the Democrats, everybody takes this opportunity when they're in the minority party to talk about the worries, and they're legitimate, the worries about the deficits in this country and how we're spending. However, this mechanism is just pretty much a pro forma action that's used for good political messaging. As you can probably tell, it frustrates me to no end, because this has implications, for you personally. stock market tends to react if they think it's not if it's not going to go smoothly. I mean, and then of course our economy is global. So the idea of the US defaulting on its debts would cause a global crisis. So that's my frustration that I decided just to talk about for a minute. But October 18 is the date that the Treasury Secretary has said is kind of the drop dead date for this action to happen. And it is not at all clear how the Congress will go through with it. But I can tell you this, I don't think the Republicans are going to budge or support it. So the likely scenario is that the Democrats, who have a very slim margin in both House and Senate, will need to incorporate it either into the budget reconciliation bill, or that's probably what will happen. They'll have to incorporate it because there's just no Republican votes at this point to go forward with it. So that's my prediction about how it will actually happen. The Democrats will have to take the heat for doing it in a partisan manner, but there are not 60 votes anywhere to do this. So it'll need to go through the budget reconciliation process, which allows a 51 vote margin. So that's 50 Democrats plus the vice president will equal enough votes to raise the debt ceiling. Lastly, on the appropriations process is a separate process, right? So yes, the government's funded until December, but appropriations bills have to pass. Appropriations bills are bills that fund the specific agencies. I know I've said this before on these calls, but if you're not following the appropriations bills and what they say and what they fund your specific programs, or at least the department that you're under, like the program offices that you're under, you're missing a huge opportunity to get a leg up on your competition. It's appropriations.house.gov. That's where you can find all the appropriations bills. And but they have to pass. The Congress has to pass it in order to keep the government specific programs and specific agencies funded. A continuing resolution is not necessarily a solution because it just keeps things at last year's levels. It does not have any language with respect to how programs should be run. All of that happens on appropriations bills. I would say that there is a scenario out there where the Republicans are making noises in the Senate about just having a year-long continuing resolution. I think that's terrible for government contractors, and hope that won't happen. But that's one scenario. The appropriations bills will all at some point pass at the end of December, probably.
Right.
It will probably come in one of those big omnibus bills, which funds, 12 agencies all at one time. Or it can be broken up into 3 or 4 agencies at a time, which in weird political speak is called minibuses. So there's a couple of scenarios for it to move forward, but generally speaking, the appropriations process concludes not by the beginning of the fiscal year as is envisioned. It concludes right around Christmas when everybody is super cranky and wants to go home for Christmas and spend it with their families. That's usually when the leaders of the Senate and the House can get everybody focused on passing it.
Yeah, I think that we're going to probably revisit another continuing resolution on December 3rd and kind of have that fight again, and then have Congress pass another one for maybe another week or two. This is again something that you all have heard us talk about now for years, seems to happen kind of every year, but I would anticipate that by December 3rd probably all of the appropriations bills won't be finished. So there might be some that have passed, are less contentious than others. There might be a partial continuing resolution. But as Anne said, by the end of the year is probably when we anticipate that money to come out. And something that she alluded to in a webinar that our team does is called Follow the Money, which is all about finding federal contract opportunities and identifying programs and dollars in the appropriations process. So I'll talk to Michelle. That's something that we probably need to do for you all sometime soon with, you know, the new appropriations process. I see a head nod, fantastic. But as Anne said, that's definitely something, all of these things that you should be following, and we will, you know, keep you updated on. So let's kind of talk about the reconciliation package or budget reconciliation, which Anne alluded to and mentioned as the process most likely to raise the debt ceiling. So this is something that I think everyone's probably familiar by now, since the media has talked about it enough. But the idea behind utilizing budget reconciliation is so that they can, whoever's in power at this point, it's the Democrats who control the House and Senate, use this procedure, which allows for a simple majority, meaning 51. So all 50 Democrats plus the vice president would break the tie in the Senate to pass the bill instead of the usual 60 vote threshold, which would require 10 Republicans or 10 Republicans to support. This isn't something that can be used all the time. And so this is something that the Republicans did when they were in power in Congress back in 2017 with tax legislation. And so the Democrats have decided that they want to utilize this for part of their human infrastructure and expansion of domestic programs, and really carry most of the president's Build Back Better plan is what it's called, the president's agenda. This is the vehicle which they want to move this legislation. One of the probably things that you've heard a lot about is the cost of the bill. It's been said it's 3.5 trillion over 10 years, but we didn't include that on that slide because right now, two of the moderate senators, Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, two moderate Democrats, are negotiating around the bill and the price tag as we speak. They've said it's too high. And as we mentioned, you know, without their votes, it can't pass the Senate. So that number is likely and it's inevitably going to go down, and you know, no one's really knows what it is right now. But that's why we didn't include it on this slide. So just kind of how is this thing being funded? It's through tax increases, you know, mainly targeting different corporate rates and earners over 400,000. We have the list there on the slide. But I would note that, you know, everything that's happened up to this point on the reconciliation package, and Eliza's going to talk a little bit about what was in the small business title. All of the committees in the House have been passing what they ideally would want to do with this money if it went through. Just because the House Small Business Committee passed all these things doesn't mean that it's now going into effect. This was just kind of their wish list of, you know, if we had this 25 billion in this reconciliation bill, you know, here's what we do. And do you have any comments on this before Eliza talks about the title?
No, I just think, you know, stay tuned, right? Because this reconciliation bill, as I mentioned before, allows for a majority vote in the Senate, which is key. And so that's why that's why there's so much angst and wrangling over it. The House progressives are pushing back. They really don't want the cost of the bill to go down. So that's really the, you know, right now that's who's negotiating, the House progressives and the Senate moderates, of which there are only two, really. There may be a few more that consider themselves that, but there's really two main people. So those negotiations are going on. Why should you care about this bill? The reason you should care about this bill and know what's in it is, again, there's a lot of government spending that will happen as a result if it passes. It won't happen right away because you need appropriations to go with it. But you know, we're working with people who have ask us to follow this strictly so that they can follow the stream of money that will happen if this passes.
Exactly. Eliza, do you want to tell us what's in the title?
Yes. So like Lizzie said, this title gives $25 billion for small business programs. The provisions go along with the Biden administration's initiative to increase contract awards to disadvantaged small business contractors by 50% by 2026. So as I'll explain, a lot of the provisions are targeted at expanding the number of small businesses in the contracting space, particularly focusing on underserved small businesses. So I've pulled a couple, I think, relevant provisions in the title. The first is the Uplift Accelerator Program. The title gives $1 billion to this new grant program that provides mentorship and other support to growing and startup government contractors, and offers capital and the opportunity to raise capital from outside investors. Part of this is the Business Development Academy, which is a separate grant program that pairs a year-long mentoring and training program for underserved small businesses. These academies will be located at HBCUs and minority serving institutions, MSIs. The second thing on here is the Growth Accelerator Program. The title gives $400 million over 10 years to provide cash grants to growth accelerators, meant to expand the capabilities of these growth accelerators to offer services to small businesses, focusing on technology and research and development. Next is the National Innovation Support Ecosystem Grant Program. So the title gives $525 million for the SBA to develop a new innovation network. So that entails the SBA having the capability to make grants to universities, resource partners, growth accelerators, and business incubators to help small businesses advance in STEM innovation. And the last thing I included on here is the program for increasing equity investment of the SBIC program. So this section creates two sub-programs within the SBIC. The first is the Venture Small Business Investment Companies Program, the VSBIC. And this program will provide capital to underserved markets and industries, including infrastructure, childcare, and manufacturing. And the second sub-program is the Emerging Managers Program. The title provides $20 million for this program, which is kind of a mentorship program meant to pair less experienced fund managers interested in getting their first SBIC license with experienced SBIC managers. This goes along with the Biden administration's pull to want to get more different arrays of businesses into the program.
Thank you.
Like
And I
said-
just put in the chat, I was going to say where you can find the entire small business title. I see Tim had a question. Who will run the accelerator and the Business Development Academy? Is it SBA?
Yes.
As far as I am aware, yes, it's being paired with different local HBCUs and minority serving institutions. So I think a lot of the details are forthcoming.
Exactly. Well, thank you. As I said, you can find the whole title at smallbusiness.house.gov if you're interested, but we will keep you posted kind of on the status of this bill. So as if, just to switch gears, as if there wasn't enough kind of on Congress's plate, the National Defense Authorization Act is also in tow. If you'll remember, this is really the last kind of must-pass bill in Congress, and somewhere that our team loves to put small business contracting amendments, thanks to Ann's maneuvering 10 years ago, thinking about how to be creative and have a small business title and how to make it relevant. This has now become, you know, kind of a de facto place for different changes that we advocate for to make it into the bill. So here's kind of where we're at on the FY 2022 NDAA, because if you'll remember, technically it's for the next fiscal year, but they usually pass it in the previous fiscal year. The Senate is still working on their bill, and there weren't a ton of small business amendments. I think there were only 4, and none of the ones that are listed on the screen in that bill. So we're not really going to focus on that since they are still working. But the House passed their bill on September 23rd. So I just want to highlight some of the things that were in that bill. And some of the amendments that we are so excited about, which is why I got a really big smile when this slide came up. Okay, the first one is something that all the members on the call will appreciate that, we've been working on, which is clarifying that the HUBZone price preference applies to task orders. So this is something that, has been, in our opinion, a misunderstanding of interpretation. And something that needed to be clarified by Congress, that the price preference did apply to task orders, and that's exactly what this amendment does. Shout out to Council Board Member John Williams at Polaro Mazza and his team. They did an incredible white paper, laying out the legal argument to help us advocate for this priority. So we are so thrilled that this amendment made it into the bill.
Lizzie, can I just also do a shout out to Steve Sinnott, who actually was the first person who brought this to our attention years ago and kept on it. And so here we go.
Thank you, Steve. If you're on the call, thank you. So we're really excited. As you know, with things we've done with the HUBZone program in the past, our theory is that we always chip away. So this might have taken longer than you had hoped, but here we are. So we're really jazzed about that one. Another thing we've been talking about ad nauseum is raising sole source thresholds for HUBZone businesses, SCVSBs, WSB, individually owned 8A companies. Currently, the levels are at 4.5 and 7.5 million. That's not 4 and 7 because it was adjusted for inflation. However, what this amendment does is it raises the thresholds from 4 million to 8 million for services and everything else, and then from 7.5 to 10 million for manufacturing. One clarification, because I know we've talked about this a lot of times, that is the total amount over the life of the contract. So it'd be 8 million over 5 years. Unfortunately, this bill does not eliminate the option years like our bills that we worked on last year, but it's a step in the right direction to, bring these thresholds in line with contract buying. So that made it into the bill. Ann, did you have a comment on that one? I saw you unmuted.
No, I just unmuted, but I was just going to say, so we got half a loaf, basically.
That's a really good way to put it. Another amendment that made it in, this is a really great NDAA, was around something else that the council has really been at the forefront on, which is around category management, which is the government trying to buy more like a single enterprise. The council convened roundtables on this a few years ago and really started the drumbeat of talking about category management and the harm on small business and trying to figure out, what could we do to minimize those impacts. If you were at the strategic summit in person, the SBA folks had a session and they actually talked about category management and its harm. And I have to say that this is just kind of a different drumbeat than maybe a few years ago. And so cheers to everyone who has continued to talk about this and the council's efforts around this effort. And what this amendment does is it creates category management exemptions for tier 0 or direct contracts. So basically it exempts contracts that are awarded to small businesses that are classified as tier 0 from category management or successor strategies for contract consolidation. Because as you'll remember, bundling was popular a while ago, and then now it's called category management and it's similar. So the idea is that, you will be able to then also mitigate the impacts with any successor strategies in the future. And it also does not allow these contracts to count toward attainment of category management contract goals. So that was floor number 186. Another amendment that made it into the bill was transferring the decision for HUBZone appeals to the Office of Hearing Appeals at SBA. instead of having the HUBZone office decide appeals, which we thought was a little backwards, to bring some parity to the HUBZone program and bring it aligned with the other socioeconomic programs. This amendment will transfer the final decision-making power of protested HUBZone small business status of a small business from the Associate Administrator of Office of Government Contracting to the SBA Office of Hearing and Appeals. So we're excited for some parity on that one. Our last amendment that was as a result of the council's advocacy, before I kind of talk about some of the other ones sprinkled in this bill, was a direct result of a hearing that the House Small Business Committee held a few months ago on the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC, that's coming out of DoD. The council had Michael Dunbar, a council member, testify at this hearing. That really was our baby, and we've been meaning to have for a while, and really highlighted a bunch of the issues and brought to the forefront the thought that the industrial base and small businesses are important, and we need to do things or take some action to help mitigate the burden of CMMC on small business so that it can be successfully implemented. So what this amendment does, 337, it requires the DoD to report the impact of CMMC on small businesses. The report has to include the estimated cost burden for each CMMC level, anticipate decrease in number of small businesses as a result of CMMC, and also how the DoD plans to mitigate the negative effects to small businesses resulting from CMMC. And the reason a report is important is because without that data and without forcing DoD to say how they're going to mitigate the effects, it's kind of easy for DoD to kind of ignore or just kind of gloss over and say, yeah, we're considering small businesses. So this report would be due within 120 days of enactment. So we're excited that that one also made it in the bill as a direct result of one of the council's recommendations during the hearing. So what else is in the bill? I know I keep going, but there are many things in the small business component title, the NDAA in the House. Something that's been talked about a lot is raising the small business contracting goals. And it's something that the president has said. He said he wanted 50%, 50 more contract awards made to small disadvantaged businesses. But then he also said that he wanted the 8A goal as a whole raised to 15%. But as we pointed out, that's something that has to be statutory. So the House put this into writing. So here's kind of how the goals get changed in this amendment. It increases the overall prime contracting small business goal from 23% to 25%. It increases the HUBZone goal from 3% to 4%. It increases the SDVOSB or veterans goal from 3% to 4%. And then it increases the women-owned small business goal from 5% to 6% for FY 2022 and FY 2023. And then finally to 7% for FY 2024 and thereafter. And then bear with me, the amendment increases the 8A goal from 5% to 11% for FY 2022, 12% for FY 23, 13% for FY 24, and then that final 15% for FY 25 and thereafter. So it takes an incremental approach for those two, and then again raises the HUBZone goal from 3 to 4%. Anne, you want to comment on this? Any thoughts?
Well, I'm just going to say that it doesn't sound like much of a victory or, much like we had much input, but actually there was no plan initially to do anything but raise the 8A goal, right? So, is there parity? No, not in the goals, but with this legislation, but the original plan was not to raise any other goals. So, again, this was half a loaf. But if the council hadn't advocated, it would have just simply been applicable to 8A and nobody else. And Deidre Thomas says, I understand the goal's never been met. Absolutely correct.
Exactly. And then we have two other things that were included on the NDAA this year. And it was, one was to require a company to update their small business status in SAM, or the system for award management, and notify contracting officers if the status changes within 2 days. So basically, if a final decision is made, that you're no longer a small business or a HUBZone business, it's going to require companies to notify the contracting officers for pending bids that you lost your status and update in SAM. This, to note, these are all bipartisan amendments, but the idea behind this one was to, eliminate some fraud, which Congress is always looking to do. So this is one way they wanted to do it. And the last one adds cyber counseling capabilities to small business development centers. This is something that both actually the Senate and House have been trying to do for a while to tackle cybersecurity and cyber counseling and kind of the lack of availability at SBA's resource partners. So what this amendment would do would basically train the trainers, so train people at SBDCs in order to be certified to then provide cyber counseling to small businesses. So a lot of really good stuff in this bill. Again, this is what happened, or this is what passed the House, and the Senate's still working. So once the Senate passes their version, then the bills get conference, meaning that they're trying to work out the two differences and come to an agreement on what the final bill should look like to go to the president. One thing that we'll talk about at the end, but I want to bring to your attention now, is that it is so important for us to advocate to keep the amendments that we want in the bill, since, as I mentioned, they're initially not in the Senate bill right now. So we're going to ask everyone to sign on, and we'll have a link where you can do that, to a letter to the Senate saying, these provisions are really important to us and you should keep them in the final bill. I see a lot is going on in the chat. Emily said, is there any discussion about accountability efforts? Why raise it if you're not going to hold accountable? Are you talking about like carrot and a stick, or
I think she's talking about, the stuff that I'm not sure if you're ready. I know that you've been working with representatives about the scorecard issue, as well as like the double and triple dipping and the lack of set asides, but I know that that's still at a draft stage. So that's why I responded. I'm not sure if you're going to openly discuss those actions on here, given the fact that we don't want something to die before it even gets to start. But
yeah, great point. Two things. One thing that's been floated around and has been worked on trying to get through is adding the actual dollar amount to subcontracting on the scorecard, because right now just telling us a percentage, like, that means nothing. So that's a drumbeat that the council has been working on with their strategic partner that we also represent, the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce, in order to have that type of accountability. On the double counting, this is something that the council has been saying, oh my gosh, it was in Delali's testimony in the Senate 2-3 years ago, is when we started talking about it, which is, you should be, instead of being able to account if you're awarded, if you're a HUBZone and a women-owned and an 8A, based on what the contract is set aside, that's how the goal should be counted for, right? So not that what Michelle has been called double dipping or triple dipping. That's something that we have been advocating for and that Congress is aware of and we're working on, but it didn't, it's not baked enough to have made it in the NDAA, but that is something that we've been working on for a while and is getting some traction.
Well, I would just say that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, I was just going to ask too, when you made the comment about increasing 8A, is it 8A or is it SDB?
So in that instance where we went through all the broken down the categories, it would be the last category was 8A. It's generally all women, minorities are really considered, at least by the Congress, as being SDB.
Yeah, so, but they were talking about specifically 8A set asides, meaning that.
Yes.
So what if so that wouldn't count towards it if they were just an SDB, if they didn't actually have the 8A certification?
I don't think so. I mean, at least practically not. They're
That is a
really
big
targeting.
difference. Yeah, I'm not sure. I feel like they think that that's going to fall under that component, but we've had a significant decline in the number of truly certified 8As. Like it's become a
Correct.
lot more
And that-
stagnant. So that's going to be very difficult to meet other than
Correct.
going tribal.
Correct. Point well taken. And, the executive order that Biden issued, President Biden issued, said that his goal was to increase contracting by 50%, the awards, contract awards, by 50% to SDB businesses. So that's a really tall order and a really big goal that, frankly, in my opinion, supersedes anything that Congress is doing on goals, because that's really aggressive. And so that's why agencies are all scrambling and holding listening sessions. Michelle, you've been on them. I've been on them. I was just on one with GSA yesterday. They're all scrambling to figure out how, with a limited group of individual 8A companies, are they going to meet that 50%?
Well, if he specifically used the language SDB and not 8A, meaning if the goals increase, one thing that we could try to do is get SDVOSBs and hub zones classified under the term of SDB in the FAR. I mean, because women already are. Women are presumed to be disadvantaged, and individuals with disabilities are presumed to be disadvantaged. And his language and his executive orders encompass like rural and, economically impoverished as disadvantaged. So maybe an option. Okay, I'm going to shut up now. I'm sorry.
Well, but the point to bring home on this discussion to me is goals are important, and agencies spend so much time counting and doing things to try to meet goals. But the fact of the matter is awards are really the overriding theme, and awards are, that's where the rubber meets the road. So the fact that the 3% HUBZone goal has not been met just means that there's a lot of work to do with respect to agencies and awards. And Michelle, I would say that you've done just an excellent job on that end, and it's really been effective, but there's no time to waste. We have to keep on that drumbeat.
Thank you.
Exactly. So that's the NDAA. We wanted to just next kind of highlight for you, if you weren't able to attend the strategic summit, and just kind of thank the fantastic speakers. Michelle, I'm sure everyone will agree, brought together an absolutely rockin' group of people, and also throughout this entire month. So I'd encourage you to go check out any of the webinars that she's done over the past month as well. The Administrator Guzman of the SBA came and spoke, schlepped all the way out to Dulles, which was fantastic. Both Lori and Bruce talked about, gave updates from the SBA, but there are also other members from the SBA team there as well, from their Office of Government Contracting and General Counsel. Special thank you to my panelists on CMMC panel, Kyle, John, and Michael, and also to Michael from the Marine Corps, who also joined a supply chain discussion where we took the questions from the CMMC panel in person and then asked him, since he was an IT expert, on the webinar. And we also had, in case you missed it at the beginning of the conference in person, a video message from Ranking Member Blaine Luetkemeyer as well that we wanted to play for you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to address the HUBZone Contractors National Council.
Eliza, you have to unmute so everyone can hear it.
Hard work to fuel small business growth in underutilized areas while expanding contracting opportunities for small businesses. I appreciate the collaborative work between the HUBZone Council and our committee to ensure improvements are made to this program as we seek ways to increase the utilization of small business across the government. As you may know, there's a statutory goal of awarding 3% of all contracting dollars to HUBZone companies and 23% to all small businesses. Unfortunately, the government also engages in practices which inflate their goaling achievements, making the data misleading and inaccurate. It is my priority to ensure these dollars are accurately reported, so we have a better understanding of the federal government's true small business achievements. Additionally, it has always been a priority of mine to combat fraud, waste, and abuse within the SBA's contracting programs. With the help of the HUBZone Council, we can close loopholes and build additional protection measures that ensure only truly qualified small businesses gain access to small business contracts. I continue to work with my counterparts on other congressional committees to ensure that programs impacting small businesses, such as the Department of Defense's Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification and the Office of Federal Procurement's Policy Category Management Initiative, actively work toward improving outcomes for all small contractors, including HUBZone small businesses. I know the HUBZone Council will continue to lead efforts to assist small businesses across the country, including underutilized rural and urban communities, in combating challenges. It is essential that small businesses continue to create jobs, train employees, innovate, and serve their communities. With that, I want to thank you for your hard work and commitment to small business prosperity. Take care.
And, this is, while he is the ranking member, we also, as you know, the HUBZone Council works bipartisanly and has support as well from Chair Velasquez's team, but just kind of shows you with the things he mentioned. He did mention the double counting that we discussed. That's something his team is working on, but also just great to have, really wonderful allies in Congress to help us achieve our priorities. So we're really excited for the video. All right, I want to switch gears. If you could go to the next slide. I can't believe that worked. I feel like the technology never works for videos. That was very exciting.
I know.
I just wanted to talk about, a few other important policy updates we had for federal contractors. And I'll let Ann tackle the first one around some guidance that came out with COVID-19.
Before we go to that, I just wanted to give a quick update on the infrastructure bill. It's really in flux, which is why we didn't really list it. Today, the House was supposed to vote on the infrastructure bill, which would have set it up to go to the president. The Senate already passed it in a bipartisan manner, but there's a lot of wrangling going on in the House because the progressives want to make sure that budget reconciliation is paired with that vote in the House. And so I don't know if it's going to happen today, but within, the next week or so, I would say there's going to be some resolution of it. I know that there's a lot in that bill for a lot of people on this call, so I just wanted to give the update. Let me go to the policy for federal contractors. The federal contractors and subcontractors with a covered contract are required to follow the COVID vaccine requirements for federal employees. Vaccination of covered contractor employees, except in limited circumstances when there's an exemption, a legal exemption. No later than December 8th is when they have to be vaccinated. If they are working on it from their residence, so if they're on site, if they're working on it from their residence, they also have to comply with the vaccination requirements. So it's not just applicable to the folks that are working on site in federal agencies. Basically, all of your employees need to be vaccinated. There's compliance by individuals, including covered contractor employees and visitors, with the guidance related to masking and physical distancing while in covered contractor workplaces. So there's specific guidance on that. And then there's also a designation by covered contractors of a person or persons to coordinate workplace safety guidance for agencies. And so basically, the bottom line is everybody needs to get vaccinated if you want to be in compliance all the way down the chain, whether they're on site or not on site. But there's nuances to this, and I think we've got or we should put it in the chat if we don't have it on the slide, about where you can find those guidances. The guidances are basically issued by the Department of Labor, by OSHA specifically. So you can also go on those websites and make sure you stay informed. Additionally, agencies are kind of doing their own issuing their own things as well. I know GSA is, and probably some others. So just make sure you know exactly what you need to do to comply. The FAR Council on October 8th is going to issue guidance for agencies to add a clause related to the safety protocols. So look out for those. As I said, agencies can add their own take on this particular requirement. And they should have all of that kind of guidance, additional guidance out by October 15.
And Shirley asked, Anne, is there a formal notification process being put into place? Shirley, do you mean to tell for contractors to tell the
Yes,
government, or
to notify the contracting officers, or what? Is there going to be a requirement? I know I'm getting letters now saying that, but there's no indication of how we're supposed to notify.
Right.
They're just
Right.
saying by December 8th, if they're not vaccinated, they will have to be removed.
I don't think I'm not aware that it's come out yet in terms of
Okay,
how to talk about, how to let them know about compliance, but I know that's forthcoming.
okay.
and one thing, Shirley, I would say that's important to participate to and bring that up in is GSA is holding an industry engagement day around this EO, and I'm going to put the link in the chat right now. So I would encourage you to go and register for that. It's on October 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern
Okay,
to talk about, they're basically looking for industry feedback on implementing this executive order before kind of the deadlines that Ann mentioned start to go into effect.
okay.
The link is in the chat to register for that. Another thing happening is the FAR issued a final rule on the revision of limitations on subcontracting. Basically, it's standardizing the limitations on subcontracting that apply to small businesses to more closely align them with SBA regulations. As we know, a lot of times what SBA has issued and the FAR are sometimes different, and they're fighting each other. So this is trying to harmonize some rules around LOS. A couple of things it does is the definition of similarly situated entity is revised to provide an example of entities that have the same small business program status. And it also specifies that that entity must be under the same NAICS code assigned to the subcontract by the prime. The final rule also clarifies that the non-manufacturer rule and the limitations on subcontracting apply to set-asides and sole source contracts, as well as awards using the HUBZone price evaluation preference, regardless of dollar value. DoD also, issued a deviation to provide some greater clarity for small businesses when measuring this type of compliance, but know that if this is something that applies to your business, the FAR did issue a final rule. Eliza, you want to talk about the last one?
Yes, so on September 8th, the SBA made a few pretty important updates to the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, EIDL. Changes include an increase in the amount that can be borrowed from $500,000 to $2 million. EIDL funds can also now be used to pay and prepay commercial debt and make payments on federal business debt. And that federal business debt can be previous debt, present debt, or future debt. Businesses can now wait 2 years after the loan origination date to repay the loan. And beginning on the date of the changes, so September 8th, the SBA opened up a 1-month exclusivity window for businesses requesting $500,000 or less. So this will end on October 8th when the program will open up to businesses requesting loan amounts of all sizes up to $2 million. This is kind of similar to what they did with the PPP, giving the smallest businesses kind of a first shot at getting money through the program. And the COVID EIDL program will be open and continuing to accept applications until December 31st or until funds run out.
Fantastic. So I think that's kind of our updates on federal contractors. And any final thoughts on this slide?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I just think patience is required with respect to the rollout of the vaccine mandate. And I know everybody is anxiously trying to figure out the details. And so just look for guidance. And of course, that the HUBZone Council is a place where you will find the most recent information.
Great. So one of the things that council members have told us that they really like is when we do some updates on kind of what's going on with spending trends or contracting trends during these updates. So we wanted to bring up some, data that's also very relevant to our category management advocacy priorities that Bloomberg government just came out with. Which is around multiple award contracts and best in class contracts, those large IDIQs taking on bigger roles. So one of the things that Bloomberg found is that, as we know, IDIQs or max or multiple award contracts really represent many of the largest contracts across the government. And spending through those vehicles increased 41%. From FY 2016 to FY 2020. And that actually now accounts for, sorry, I thought I had heard some, Shirley, I think you need to go on mute. It now accounts for nearly half of all obligated spending. So that's a big jump, 41% over not that many fiscal years going through those vehicles. And this is definitely a result of the ongoing category management initiative. It's really aggressively shifted, especially now that you look at the data, those dollars to multiple award and best in class contracts like GSA's multiple award schedules, Alliant and Oasis vehicles. The best in class spending actually totaled a record of $51 billion in FY 2020, which is up 74% since FY 2016. And actually, if you look at the goals for category management and spend through these best-in-class solutions, I think it was by FY 2020, they wanted to reach about 70%. So it looks like that spending has reached or exceeded that goal. The realities facing contract shops with limited staff is, with an increase of appropriate funds, utilization of more multiple award contracts is going to happen. The max spending grew 42% over 5 years. And that's a record $159 billion in FY 2020. So there are now more than 2,000 multiple award contract vehicles, accounting for nearly 1 of every 4 federal contract dollars. Also, another thing, kind of impacting this spending trend is the inability, like we talked about, for Congress to actually pass the appropriations on time. And it's really been increasing the reliance on these larger vehicles. Congress has enacted continuing resolutions in every year except for 3 since 1977. So it's now really become kind of the regular thing to do. And when agencies don't receive full appropriations until several months into the fiscal year, there's more uncertainty from contract staff and less time to conduct solicitations. And it's really increasing the possibility that contracting officers will choose existing contracts or these large vehicles to fulfill urgent requirements. So all of this is just to say, these numbers are what we expected or kind of over what, I thought the spending was. But it really does help make the case for things like increasing sole source thresholds and excluding tier 0 contracts from category management, applying the HUBZone price preference to task orders since, larger vehicles are being utilized. I think it really points to kind of a lot of the things that the council is advocating for.
Well, and it's not just the small business, at least what I keep on emphasizing is not just the small business spend with respect to these, it's how many is it going to, right? And
Right.
Shirley testified on this and in a category management hearing a couple of years ago, and I think the Congress is looking to maybe do another one. But bottom line is, if you give it to a limited amount of small businesses and just give bigger amounts, that's not what we're talking about. We're trying to make sure that there's room for new entrants and that it's spread around. So that's our other message with respect to any discussion we have on category management.
And Marshall pointed out a good point in the chat that subcontracting accountability is really more important than ever. Exactly. Again, kind of how, as I mentioned earlier, that's something that the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce has been tackling and trying to get through Congress in multiple ways, and something that the council then has been supporting those efforts since, same advocacy team. Our last slide before we turn to, what we really want to do, which is hear from you all on, things that you're facing and kind of help shape some of our priorities for the upcoming year, is a call to action that's really important that I alluded to earlier. Right now, our provisions are only in the House National Defense Authorization Act, and they're not in the Senate. So we have a sign-on form for a letter that we're putting together, trying to get as many businesses as possible, and Eliza's going to put it in the chat right now, to sign on to support the provisions in the FY22 NDAA for them to make it into the final bill. The deadline to sign on to the letter, if you want to support it, is October 6th at 5 p.m. Eastern. Again, the link is going to be in the chat, and we would encourage you to sign on and help us with this advocacy effort. Anne, did you have any comments on that, or Michelle?
Well,
I know Michelle loved the call to action.
I was just going to say that if you're located in Maryland, the key, both of your senators are really key to this outcome because Senator Van Hollen is on Appropriations Committee, and appropriators have more weight than almost anybody else with respect to what gets into legislation. And then Senator Cardin is the head of the Small Business Committee in the Senate, and that's the authorizing committee. And so that's really important as well to communicate. So Maryland people, we really need your help.
And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle, so we can kind of start talking and hearing from you, which is what we love to do.
So we're going to be sending this out to all of our members, right, with the form, because we were preparing a separate email, correct? Or do you want me to go ahead and get that started with sending it out? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, we'll talk offline, but
okay,
this will be also sent via email to everyone, but we want to give the opportunity and bring it up now in the chat.
All right, sounds good. Really appreciate that. So as we mentioned here earlier, this is your time to really address some of the concerns that you might want to bring up and add to the docket. One thing, I'm actually going to pull up my email here because I know that one of our members, Jeff Klasick, actually proposed something that I forgot. Now I'm pulling it up. So I know employee retention credit for Congress. Does that ring a bell for you guys? Okay. So let me read this because I'm sure this makes more sense to you than it does to me. So one of our members said, the employee retention credit issue was discussed. The link will offer solutions. Okay, he didn't. Okay, I need more context. Basically, I feel like he was saying that they were getting rid of the employee retention credit and it was going to have an issue.
It's
wanted-
expiring, yeah.
Yeah, and he was saying that, you know, he would love for us to add that to maybe our advocacy, that, you know, the removal of that will be very detrimental to companies. Based on your head nod, you are so much more familiar than this than me. So I just wanted to pass that along. I believe I forwarded this email already, but I'll go ahead and I'll make sure I send it to you guys again.
And I would just say agreed.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of industry is working on keeping this.
All right, perfect. So is there anything that we should be doing, or just send it over? Like, you have any recommendations on what the company should be doing, or?
Well, you know, if you feel strongly about it, and you should always just send a note to your congressional delegation. That's 2 senators and your representative. On any issue that's important to you. It doesn't have to be a coordinated issue through the council. You should feel free anytime that you feel strongly about something to drop them a note. You have no idea how impactful that is when they hear from their constituents, especially businesses. So I want to urge you to do that.
All right, well, that's some good feedback. With monitoring the Q&A, did anybody else, I'm not sure, did the 1099 question get answered? Did you guys answer that? That was in the Q&A?
Yeah, I had put the guidance in the chat to look
Okay.
through if that's been, to check if that's been addressed, but I'm assuming that's something that will also be addressed in the GSA industry session as well.
All right, so everybody, I'm hoping that most people are familiar with what our current legislative priorities are. We all know that the sole sourcing issue, and we all want J&A, we all want parity. And we're going to continue to fight for that. But, you know, the reality is that they say baby steps. We know with subcontracting, we're, you know, trying to get more reform, and they covered a lot of those topics. But is there any other issues that people want to bring up that they want to have taken into consideration that we're unaware of right now?
And Michelle, if someone raises their hand, then are you able
Yeah,
to
feel free to
unmute
raise
them?
your hand. If you don't want to type it and you want to just raise your hand to be able to speak, feel free, and we'll put you on live. Oh, wow, everybody's going to be shy. Okay, Marshall raised his hand. Okay, let me put you
We
up.
know Marshall won't be shy.
Yeah, exactly.
Marshall?
All right, go ahead, Marshall. You can unmute yourself and talk now.
I was going to say, I just happened to miss to put something in the chat and raise my hand instead.
Thank
No,
you.
no. Okay. My favorite topic is just making sure we continue to keep pushing along on allowing hub zones to get it qualified for the U.S. Department of Transportation's Transportation Trust Fund work, especially now if it's getting to be as big as it's going to be, adding another $500 billion on top of existing spending. So that's continues to be an issue. And from a legislative standpoint, I don't think there has a lot to be done, but other than continue to look at how the DBE goals are set and see if we can get some flexibility so that they can increase them, especially in recognition of the continuing expansion of goals for contracting under the Small Business Act.
All right.
And I want to give a shout out to Marshall, who worked tirelessly to do a draft position paper on that DOT issue. That I know, Marshall, this is something you've also done before. So thank you for your time and energy and efforts, you know, to really help us advocate for that issue.
I read it yesterday. It was really good. There's a lot of backstory in there I wasn't aware of.
Well,
So-
I would say the new development there, because it's not a new issue, right?
Yeah.
And the Congress has just been resistant to consider it. But the new development there is that the SBA may have some interest in helping us.
Yep.
And their voice, and that could really help push it in the Congress. So that's where we're at in terms of on that issue, trying to come up with a different angle to make that successful.
Yeah, so a big thing that we talked about at the strategic summit is that FAA is now recognizing the HUBZone program, which is something that they never did before. And that kind of drafted, we had a conversation with Lori and she goes, oh, I didn't know that they didn't recognize them. And this was back when Frank Spampanato was the associate administrator and apparently had been a contracting officer for FAA and, started putting that stuff into motion. Next thing you know, as of January 2021, FAA recognizes HUBZone, which is crazy. Like that's a really big deal because it counts for like 80 to 85% of the spend that comes out. So that was a huge overhaul. And we also, for the first time ever, DOT not only participated in the HUBZone Strategic Summit, they hosted a presentation. They brought multiple senior level contract representatives to it, and they hosted 10 matchmaking tables, 10. And then we found out that FHA actually has 35% HUBZone spend. So, and they take contract performance location into consideration when they're developing acquisition strategies. So all of this, DOT's acquisition strategies really align with what we're really hoping that, other agencies would follow in suit with. And it's like, so wait a minute, you want to keep us out, but you're doing everything that kind of aligns with the mission of the HUBZone program. Like your acquisition strategy aligns perfectly with it. But then you exclude them. So, hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll see some change down the line. The council's also been working with the Maryland Public Utility Commission to try to get HUBZone recognized on the state level. Now, this is just the Maryland Public Utility, but, like we said, baby steps. Everybody needs to be the first. And so once somebody does it once, you've developed a pathway for other areas to follow in suit. So fingers crossed that will go forward. We did already, worked with multiple state senators, as well as members from the utility forum, and we've already testified. So I'll keep you guys in the loop on what happens with that, but fingers crossed. The other thing I wanted to bring up too is there's been a lot of talk about, I know the SBA is thinking about, going back to the drawing board with some of the HUBZone rule changes. They realize, I think now that, they need to clean up the language on some of the rules and then with the annual research and things like that. So if you do have any suggestions, feel free to share them with us. I do anticipate they'll probably be releasing something in the next couple months. But one thing that we did propose is, the whole concept behind legacy employee, and as somebody that used to review HUBZone files, it's very hard to enforce. But one recommendation individuals mentioned was, what about double credit? And there's kind of a debacle, and this is where I hope Madison can, cue in. Some say that it would be statutory and some say it'd be regulatory, because I remember the employee definition used to be an aggregate. And it wasn't a statutory change. They used to have, full-time equivalent, meaning that they would combine people's hours to get them up to full-time. So you could have 3 people working part-time, but they'd only count once. Can assure you that was horrible with the reviewers. Like, it's very hard to enforce. So my thing is if it was like that before, why wouldn't double credit for full-time employees be regulatory and not statutory? But I'm just curious. Did I say that too fast? Are you thinking, or are you?
I'm thinking.
Okay.
Well, it was definitely considered to be a regulatory issue.
I know it was
definition of
regulatory
employee.
with the employee definition.
Yeah. So
And
when they made those changes, those were strictly done by SBA. So I don't see why there would be an issue with being able to indicate the double credit. And which, if you took it based on the 40, it would really be a 4-to-1 if you went. So asking for a double credit would probably be more palatable.
Yeah, I can assure you the 4-to-1 is not going to fly.
No, I know that won't fly. I know that won't fly because we already sort of tested that water. But yeah, but I think a double credit would incentivize full-time employment and not eliminate our 40 hours in a month that we use for training programs and internship programs and things like that. We don't want to lose that ability to still incentivize people to do that.
This strikes me as a regulatory issue. So what I missed, Michelle, in your comments was who's suggesting that it's statutory?
Well, in our conversations, they're like, well, 35% is statutory. And so SBA, I think when I was having conversations with senior leadership at SBA, I think they're not sure if they have the authority to do something like that.
Okay.
Because it's like that fine line. And, from my opinion, I feel like it could be, but, we have a whole new team at SBA. Almost all of them are not familiar with what happened 10, 15 years ago. Because the employee definition changed in 2010. So, a lot of that stuff and the process associated to that kind of left with the other individuals. So it's still like, are we okay with doing this? It's the same way with the HUBZone mapping update. There was some confusion. Is this regulatory or is this statutory with adding them in with the freeze? And sometimes it's just a misinterpretation. And thankfully we got that cleared up. And if anybody didn't notice, the HUBZone maps is exponentially expanded, adding 300 plus non-metropolitan counties and 152 non-metro counties that were previously redesignated are now qualified. So
Well, that's a huge win.
that is, and like, I'm not sure that people even realize like how much of a win that is.
Yeah.
And I was so thankful to Lori that really gave us a shout out saying, this was the council and their efforts.
Yep.
Because they weren't even wasn't fully on their radar, given the fact that they had about a laundry list of about 5 million things going on. So.
Well, one of the things we can do is facilitate the discussion between the congressional authors, because there are some people that were there, right? The congressional authors and the SBA team with respect to interpretation. That's somewhere that perhaps we can help to facilitate a discussion so that they can figure it out. They don't have to sit there and wonder about it. They can, I think, just with a few conversations.
Well, I think we can also go back to the support of when they changed the definition of the employee to the 40 hours in the month, and that should probably give them enough support as well. That was done on a regulatory basis.
And I see Emily Newland had something about it in the chat. Emily, did you want to make any comments on that?
Do you want to raise your hand, or do you want to talk? I want to talk. Okay, I got you. Hold up one sec. All right, you can unmute yourself.
Hi. Okay. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Hi. This is a real issue for me right now with the credit. So, the 40 hours a month is like kind of weird. When I first started as a HUBZone business, I was like, well, that's nothing. But it's actually really hard to get that sometimes. But now I'm in a situation where I have a really capable part-time, I'm trying to turn her into an HR guru. She's got another job because she can't survive on just a part-time with me. And I'd love to give more hours to her, but we're incentivized to hire HUBZone bodies rather than HUBZone hours. And that's why this is so relevant for me right now, is that I have really capable folks, but I just had a HUBZone audit a couple months ago, and thankfully we were fine and we had all the right numbers of people, but looking at the hours, we had to put in work hours. I was like, this makes no sense. I should be able to hire people and give them, I got 40 hours a week of work and it would be great. And it seems like everybody would win. And I guess I'm a little fuzzy on how we could advocate for this. So I'm going to leave it to you guys in terms of the statutory versus regulatory. But if you need some real good, straight off the street examples, I have plenty of that. And I think it's the bigger thing for me is to advocate on what the intent of the program is. If we want to give economic prosperity, I can't have a brand new mom working 40 hours a month for me, making whatever she's making. She's not really going to make a dent, right? She's going to have another job. And her other job, actually, she just told me. So I was like, why are you so tired? Just a side note, she's working a 4 a.m. to 1 p.m. shift on her other job. I don't know what she's doing. But I know if I can get her a 9 to 5, 40 hours, I need the help. I'm drowning. And she would gladly take it. And I would pay her a lot more. So that's just some examples. I'm happy to write whatever letters I need to, but that's like the biggest thing for me. I know for some folks, I don't know what the pulse is. Michelle, you hear a lot. Is that something that can we do it in a way where the rest of the Hubs owners who don't have this situation wouldn't be mad at me?
No, and so
I'm not really seeing a
my
downside to it,
question
is my
that I
point.
have for you is people being familiar with the legacy employee. Do you think that it'd be more impactful to have double credit for full-time employees like receiving benefits? Because this is what I explained to Lori. Like when we changed to the 1-year research, that provided more, that was more about the contracting officers feeling comfortable than even the companies. So we don't want to take that away, but like, it's a lot harder because they kind of want to get away from like people, because I was like, people can just drop people after they get certified and there's nothing you can do about it. They can just bring them back on. And when you have somebody 40 hours in a month, that's not a big deal. You'll just take them down to almost no hours. You won't pay them anything. You'll keep them on the books and then you'll bring them back up. Now, if you have a full-time employee that's receiving benefits and you're investing in, it actually costs you money to do something like that. You're not going to go and, drop their hours down and everything, especially if they're receiving benefits, because it's still going to incur an expense for you as an employer.
Right.
So that kind of embraces the mission. I'm just curious, do you think it would be more impactful for double credit rather than legacy employee? Do you think that a legacy employee is that much more help to companies, or do you think that double credit would be more beneficial, in your personal opinion, Emily?
I mean, eventually I have to think like, a couple of years out. Like if I take this example I have right now, eventually this young woman that I'm trying to get double credit for could be legacy. So it's kind of depending on where you are of a stage, right? Like if I can get her 40 hours a week, then she could go. And I see the comment, Marshall, you're right. In construction trades, legacy is very helpful. I look at it a different way to say what's worse. For me right now, I think the double credit, if we're looking at it from regulatory perspective, it's not that hard to report it. Like the audit I just did, it wasn't a full research. It'd be really easy to just type that in there. If that's a downside concern that they're seeing on how do they measure it and how do they track it to make that less confusing. They already have the legacy in there. I'm not looking to touch that. I just think the double credit's not that hard to add in. And it would, I'm struggling to see a downside.
But it saturates the program more. You kind of have to look at it from give and take. So a lot of people have been complaining, well, why do we need principal office? We have to remember that this is an economic driver, and we don't want to dilute the program so much that it basically makes it pointless for any companies to be able to like separate. So what I'm saying is like, we have to do a give and take. What do you think? That's why I'm asking the question. If it was in a situation of an either or, which one would you choose?
I would do double credit. The legacy to me, it's not impactful to me right now. I think it's harder for the regulators to track. I think that I see the benefit of it, but I think that's a long-term goal. Honestly, if I have someone that stays with me for 5 years, that's great. But just in like the turnover that you have, legacy seems like less likely to happen. Do you know what I mean? Like I just think you're going to have turnover and you're going to be hiring more HUBs owners at some point. Like if you have someone that becomes a HUBs owner legacy, that's great. You got them for life. But the more likelihood is that you're going to hire someone for 40 hours, make the investment in them, do benefits with them, because that's how you're going to retain them. And if they end up turning into a legacy because you have given them 40 hours a week, great. But more likelihood is that you get the credit, they stay with you, everyone's full time, and then they move on.
I mean,
That's from a recruitment perspective.
Yeah.
And Michelle, I see that Tim had said legacy is not beneficial to us. We only have a few. Double credit for FT would be a big plus and allow more potential for growth in our workforce. And Mitzi also said, I have several employees who work only 40 hours a month. I can't afford to meet my HUBZone goals and hire all these full time. I think double credit. So it seems like we have some consensus around this. Thank you for your comments. And this is something that we will, as an advocacy team, noodle on and definitely engage you all as we kind of flesh out that priority.
Yeah, I mean, me on a personal level, I feel very strongly about it. I've never been a big fan of the 40 hours, not because I don't understand the concept, but the goal was always to help companies, move forward to bring the people on, but it's created a burden because people are having to hire a bunch of part-time employees to meet a goal. But then they could have hired a full-time, like Emily said, and that would have made a difference in that person's life. That could have been a huge game changer for that individual versus having to hire 3 or 4 part-time employees that it's checking a box because you're not even getting them enough time in order for them to really help you grow your business, because you really have to shape and mold them. And in my history, and I've said this to SBA, I've worked with thousands of HUBZone companies, and I have never, ever once had somebody come and tell me that they fired somebody because they no longer lived in a HUBZone. They said, yes, this is horrible. Now I'm going to have to hire a part-time employee because it messes with my numbers. But if you truly are invested in your employee, like that is a person that is a part of your company, and they are providing the added value, not, as Kendra said the other day, cheeks and seats, which was really funny. You're not going to do that. You're going to develop a strategy to retain that individual. And in my experience, the companies that I've worked with have had to do that. Is it kind of a pain? Yeah, but I've legit never had somebody be like, oh, I fired that person because they don't live in a HUBZone anymore. Sorry, oops.
I also see, and I want to give the opportunity for anyone else to give their comments as well. And I see Marshall had said that legacy was important in the urban area where he is. But there was a question. Donna said, does double credit apply only for HUBZone employees and not have to also apply double credit for other employees?
Wait, say one more time. Which one was this?
Donna said, does double credit apply only for HUBZone employees and not have to also apply double credit for other employees?
Oh yeah, it would just be HUBZone. So what are the thought process that we're noodling around? And again, this is all just conversation, is that what if it's one of your HUBZone employees, so they wouldn't count differently for your other employees. It was just being, if you have a full-time employee that is receiving benefits, that you're invested in this person, that they could count as double. Because SBA noodled on, okay, let's increase it from 40 hours. And like on the last rule change, they asked that question. Everybody was like, oh goodness, no, because it's already hard enough to maintain the 35%. But we thought about the process, and the goal is to get people to full time. So why not look at it from this way? But no, it wouldn't mean that would be double credit. You wouldn't be just, because then that would defeat the purpose, because then you'd have double the amount of employees. So it would just make it a moot point.
Well, Michelle, it's good to understand the backstory, is that SBA really wanted to promote full-time hires in this program.
Yeah.
So when they changed it down to the 40 hours in a month, they started looking at that and saying, "Hi, this is disincentivizing full-time hires." And we're saying, look, but it's incentivizing training and intern programs and other activities by the HUBZone firms that they may not normally do as well. So we need to find a way to promote full-time hires, but also not lose the training and the intern programs. So, this is the suggestion that we came up with to get double credit to incentivize full-time, but not hurt the part-timers.
Right. Well said.
The other big thing that everybody's been asking about was principal office. So people go, this is the COVID world. Why is principal office still a thing? And technically right now, the exception for principal office is only in effect until the 31st. But I asked SBA 2 days ago, they were supposed to be getting guidance out about that. And I'll follow up again today to see if there's any news, but about the extension, unless it did go out and I completely missed it, which could have happened. But I don't think that it has been updated, because Allison did say she'd tell us. But Shirley actually came up with a pretty good idea the other day, because we asked the question, okay, if people didn't have principal office, would you hire more HUBZone employees in lieu of it? And a lot of the people last time we asked that question said, no, 35% is enough. But we've got to remember, if you want to get something taken away, this is an economic driver program. How can we still meet the true intent of the program? Shirley, do you want to share the idea that you mentioned the other day? Or did you forget?
Yes,
and you want me to do
one of the things that we were talking about, and Anne and Lizzie will attest to the thing, is one of the big problems that we have when we talk to Congress is they don't want to do anything that's going to be watering down this program. And so changing, that's why we have problems with changing or reducing, you know, the 35% or eliminating principal office or any of those types of major criteria that are statutorily included. So one of the things that we were talking about is say, look, we have to recognize this virtual aspect and people working from home and the telework aspect on the HUBZone program. And what we said is that, okay, if they were to consider the possibility that somebody wanted to eliminate principal office, could they offset it by a larger number of potential HUBZone employees? And whatever that percentage would have to be a negotiated type of thing. So like, would you consider 50% in lieu of a principal office? Because you're still making that investment there. That was one suggestion. The other suggestion is that with the HUBZone employees as well, that if they're HUBZones, they're working and living in a HUBZone anyways. So really those dollars should still stay there if they're teleworking. So if you're looking at the fact that we could consider that your HUBZone employees that are teleworking could be aggregated and actually be that principal office designation. So that was, you know, a different way of looking at it, because you're getting the same benefit from the HUBZone employees that they're putting those dollars into that community. It's not going to be as significant as if somebody has that principal office, but maybe aggregating that and seeing if you aggregated the HUBZone employees at their residence as your principal office type, would that meet the criteria as well? As
I
another
wouldn't say that it
suggestion.
would be less impactful. In my opinion, I think it could be more impactful given.
Well, you're not receiving the taxes from the real estate or whatever
Well,
associated
yeah,
with the business
but,
being there.
you know, if it was creating the jobs, because essentially this was created, like the whole premise was job creation. And then the requirements were all built around that. So they had presumed, because, you know, when I talked to Senator Bond about this, you know, I asked the question, I said, was your understanding that when principal office, it was 35% of the employees in that area? That was what he wanted. That's what he thought it was going to be when he was endorsing that bill. And I go, well, that's not what happened. But he, as the you know, the individual that endorsed it, thought that it was supposed to be,
Well,
you know,
that's because
hiring
it had
employees from that HUBZone.
That's because it had that manufacturing, that when it originally came in, it had this idea that you had a plant in an area and that everybody's working in that area supporting that plant. So that's the idea how the HUBZone came on. And then when it started, you know, morphing into more service origination and all of that, that's how it started taking on these changes. But I think there's a way that we can look at this and give sort of a trade-off for principal office as something to consider. But we have to keep in mind that they are not going to just say, oh, we're going to eliminate principal office. That is not going to happen.
No,
We have to be prepared to say, okay, if it is, can we make this as, if this, then this.
So I think the way to frame the issue is, just as you said, the program originally was created to have employees show up to a specific, at that time, it was really manufacturing, right? A specific place. And the workforce and the way we do business has changed drastically since that was put in place. So I would say, to frame it, you want to talk about how can we modernize it to meet the workforce needs and the way that we all work now.
And I think that's a good approach. Donna mentioned about the elimination with redesignated areas. I know that's a concern for a lot of individuals. Now, I do think that a lot of the changes that, you know, I get the concept of why SBA has kind of excluded the redesignated areas, because these areas haven't really qualified for years and they've been grandfathered far over that time frame. And now with the maps being updated every 5 years, excluding redesignated areas is probably something that they're still going to do, because you're already getting a safe harbor. But I do know that that has been an issue for, you know, some individuals, especially with their research. And I was going to say something else that was another topic that people brought up, and now I'm completely drawing a blank. Oh, goodness. Oh, attempt to maintain. I did find out that the attempt to maintain, the language in there, because I don't know, I might be the only one. The whole concept with attempt to maintain makes zero sense to me. given the fact that there's like no set asides. Attempt to maintain makes sense to me if the government is using set asides and that's the dollars counting towards the goal. But when 85% of the contracting dollars counted towards the HUBZone goal are not HUBZone set asides, but you only get a safe harbor if you have a set aside, which is really rare in itself. And I also found out that SBA is not counting IDIQs. So if you go for your research and you have an IDIQ, or a contract vehicle of which was awarded based on your set aside, if you don't have an active task order, you cannot use that as the attempt to maintain for the 20%. I know, and yeah, see that face? Yeah, and like I get it.
Our slide pretty much told you, our data slide pretty much tells you that is a flawed policy.
Yeah, it's so stupid. And like,
That is an initiative thing that we need to readdress too, so.
but they did tell me that that's statutory. So when she mentioned that, I was like, well, fine, if that's statutory, let's add that one to the docket.
I think that's interpretation of the statute. I don't think that's statutory.
Well, that's what they told me at the last, like when I was talking to Allison, is that she said the language there is statutory for attempt to maintain. So maybe it might be an interpretation or anything, but they're trying to work within the confines. So when they're making these rules and they're writing the language, they're trying to adhere to some sort of statutory language that I apparently have not read. Because
That brings up one other one, Ann and Lizzie. And the statute, another initiative that we want to add to this that we've been considering too, was the fact of under the attempt to maintain, is that we believe that if we could strike out the prime contract so that it applies to subcontract and prime contracts actions, and that if the government is taking credit for it as a hub zone, then we should be able to get credit for it as well. So that if the government has used any of it, then we think that that should apply.
But the only problem with that there, and that would have been great had it not become to the annual research that 1 year time frame where anything.
And everybody
goes.
would be under attempt to maintain.
Exactly,
contract.
because you're essentially just dropping it down to 20%, which is kind of counterintuitive. It actually would have been better to have attempt to maintain like a safe harbor, but have it for a finite period of time, meaning that like, because when they changed the language to meaning that you could still compete during attempt to maintain, it would have made more sense to allow companies to claim attempt to maintain, but have it to where you can't bid as a hub zone while under attempt to maintain. We don't want to encourage individuals to not meet the requirements. And all they had to do is put a checkbox in there, say attempt to maintain. So you don't have to decertify and start all over again. If it fluctuates, you tell them, I'm in attempt to maintain. Okay, I'm out attempt to maintain. Checkbox. I feel like that would have been very easy the first time around. And then it would have still embraced the true intent of the program, but wouldn't have, positioned all these companies that if they see mild fluctuations, which obviously the annual research does that, but the annual research also puts companies in a position where they can do the research and then fall out of compliance and no problem, which isn't great for these hub zone communities. So.
Well,
Sorry.
I wondered if we could get it where they receive a prime contract in which the government has taken credit for HUBZone, and that would increase more attempt to maintain, and not just a prime HUBZone set aside contract.
I'm not disagreeing with your concept. I think it should apply. If, the government and everybody else is taking credit for it, the company should still get the perk. The only thing that I see an issue with is that basically that applies to everything and you're essentially just dropping it down.
No, because it doesn't apply to everything, because there's a lot of HUBZone contractors who don't have prime contracts. They have.
No, I meant even I wasn't disagreeing with you on the subcontracting component, because, we want more companies to be able to compete and participate, but we have to be reasonable as well.
So look, let's take a stab at formulating a letter to the SBA, because this again doesn't sound statutory to me, or I mean, we can share it with the Hill too, but let's try to put this in writing, because there's merit in raising the issue. And I think we're not going to get anywhere unless we kind of settle on a written communication. And I think that might be really helpful to them as well. So we'll take a crack at it with you if you're up for it.
Yes,
Okay.
I like that. So,
Fantastic. I also put in the chat because I want to be cognizant of everyone's time, and thank you to everyone who shared those with us today. But if you have any other thoughts and priorities, want to send to our team, please send them to Liza. Her email's in the chat. It's ejoiner@madisonservicesgroup.com. So while we're formulating these, we can include your thoughts.
all right, well, let's make sure that we don't have anything else that's going on in here. But I really appreciate, okay, Deidre asked, are other agencies that do not recognize HUBZone? Do you want me to take that or?
Go for it.
Guys got it. So there is a couple agencies that are excluded from the FAR. There's not many, I think it's like what, 10? And then something like that. I mean, FAA was one that doesn't, and according to Marshall the other day, I think that FAA adopting it, but correct me if I'm wrong, Marshall, you mentioned that it's not technically in the FAR, they're making that as a decision, but there's no like statute that it's a requirement for them. I mean, I can definitely find you the list, Deidre, and send it to you about the ones that are excluded, but it's probably not ones that are on your radar. Because most of them are included, but different jurisdictions under DOT in most instances, and then, Intel community and things like that. And a couple other.
FAA was the big one.
Yeah, that was the big one that
Yeah.
was on most people's radars. Like a lot of the other ones they're probably not really things, unless you're working with Intel and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the FAR Council, getting SBA on the FAR Council is one of our legislative priorities too.
Yes. We didn't mention that one. It is.
Whenever we mention that, you should see the acquisition people in the agencies shudder.
Yeah, right.
Except for SBA, they cheer us. They cheer. when
They
we do
want
that.
them in
They
their
give us-
box.
and SBA will give us fist pumps in the background quietly. Yes. So we will add that one as well.
All
I
right.
think that's it with questions, Michelle, of what was in the chat.
I believe so. And I really appreciate everybody joining. And for those that are members of the organization, I believe that we're going to be rescheduling our annual member meeting. I have to send it out to the board just to get confirmation, but we are looking at October 20th. So if there's any members on the call and you're interested, I am getting final tallies for those that are interested in joining the board. So if you are, please fill out the board proxy form because we need to get that out. And in the next couple days, you'll be receiving an email for the proxy nomination. So please just make sure that you respond to that as a member of the HUBZone Council. It is your duty to participate in the annual proxy. We do have to do that as a nonprofit. So thank you again, everybody. And with that said, let's sign off. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.